Hola y bienvenidos al Palante Non-Profits Podcast. Soy su host, Dr. Andrea Ortega, trabajando con organizaciones sin fines de lucro en Estados Unidos. I'm so excited to highlight our nonprofit leaders, change makers, and other philanthropists in our sector. Bienvenidos. Soy la doctora Andrea Ortega, host of the Palante Nonprofits podcast, and I'm so excited because normally I interview nonprofit leaders o gente que sirve en el sector para organizaciones sin fines de lucro on the ground, grassroots, pero aquí tenemos a Catalina, Director of Partnerships at Candid, and Catalina has spent her career connecting nonprofits, funders, and public agencies to data, tools, and relationships so that they can have what they need to operate. Gone through many evolutions, right? It's got a new name, but also you might not recognize it as GuideStar. So it's been around for a really long time, and it's a really important system for nonprofits to navigate through. It's probably one of the only ones that is also recognizable in terms of, we'll talk later, like their seals of transparency, the kind of profiles you can build for your nonprofit in there so that you can be recognized by other funders. Also, they are super involved with capacity building trainings and things that they do through their tool. And then, I know she's going to talk about how we met, hopefully, but she's fellow Colombian. Yo soy de Cali, ella es de Bogotá, and that's one of the reasons that we bonded. But together, we're going to explore a little bit more about qué es Candid, how she got there, what is going on right now sort of in the sector, and how Candid can help support your organization. Do you want to do a little bit more on the intro there? My first question to you is share a little bit about how you got to Candid, right? Because especially, Palante Nonprofits was built to bring a lot of the gatekeeping and knowledge that exists in this very wide-led philanthropy world. And when I think about Candid, I think also a lot about only big org knows them and maybe only people in the sector, but wow, to find another Colombiana working at Candid, with what you're doing, I was immediately like, we need to talk. So tell me how you ended up in Candid and how did you even end up in the social sector at all?
Perfecto. Primero que todo, hola a todo el mundo. Mi nombre es Catalina Spinel. Creo que, Andrea, gracias por la invitación. I'm going to start by talking how I ended up on the social sector. Como Andrea mencionó, soy colombiana, born and raised de Bogotá, o sea, city girl, although I like nature, but not too much. Although, no, I do like it. It's very powerful to ground ourselves in nature, and I do try to be with nature regularly, but not as I'm still a city girl. I think my upbringing in Colombia did inform my life choices and my professional. I saw firsthand a lot of having grown up in Bogotá, I was exposed to violence and conflict growing up. And I think that informed my curiosity and wanting to contribute to society. So early on, I knew I wanted to work on making the world a better world and a more justice world where nobody needs to be suffering and or experience that. And I say that because I think fast forward to where I'm at now, I immigrated to the US 15 years ago. It goes in a heartbeat. Cuando emigré, quería trabajar en temas sociales y hice una maestría en administración pública. Quería conocer mucho más cómo podía ayudar. Yo pensé que iba a trabajar siempre en Colombia en temas de paz, pero pues la vida tenía otros planes y rápidamente dije, no, pues en el mundo hay demasiados problemas para solucionar y los talentos que yo tengo pueden ser aplicados. Digamos que un poco trabajé, I worked at United Nations. I also worked at the New York City Department of Education. Shout out to all of the teachers, all of the people that make sure that we learn. They don't have an easy job. Entonces, shout out para todos ellos. Y también they're always justice fighters. So shout out to them. I learned a lot while my time there. And in the process, while I worked at the UN, I did consultancy on fundraising. I really wanted to help move those resources. And that was the first time I was exposed to Foundation Center. To your point, Candid is the merger of GuideStar and Foundation Center. So I did consultancies on fundraising and I was exposed to the data and I was like, wow, this is such a powerful tool. Basically, for those of you that are not familiar with Candid, we have the data of the sector. So there is 1.9 million profits or 501(c)s. And we have that information. So if you want to learn, okay, who's out there doing work, I think that that's a great way of using our tools. But then also, if you're looking for funding from foundation, specifically, we have prospecting tools on how to find those funders. I think that was fast forward when Candid happened, which was 2019. They had just merged and a position opened, and I was like, I think that this might be my next move. For me, I saw the power of data and I was like, I want to be part of it. And here I am 6 years later. So a very long-winded story of how I ended up, but sort of here we are.
Yeah, I love that. And thank you so much for sharing. Y por eso digo que, even Foundation Center, cuando I used to run a nonprofit, very grassroots, very focused in Colombia or working with migrant families, yo no sabía de Candid, right? Like it's very much known in the bigger organizations. It's changed over time, but back in those years, I'm talking 10, 15 years ago, GuideStar was, still not available, but we didn't know about how to use that tool, and especially foundation centers. Fast forward to now, Candid ha podido crear, a brand, a name for itself in the sector, y creo que es importante compartir muchos de los tools que tienen. Mi experiencia con Candid y los webinars, los workshops, la educación que existe para non-profit leaders también ha sido espectacular. 100% recomiendo. En esta siguiente pregunta, ¿cómo ves también, y algo que we kind of bonded over when we met, Latinx, Latina representation in nonprofit leadership? Y qué me dices más de cómo estamos vistiendo en el landscape de nonprofit?
So I think that that's a very good question. For some of us, as you said, there are not that many Latinx leaders. I think at Candid, we do have the data. And I say that because I think data always helps us ground many conversations. Before I dive into the data, I would want to highlight two things. Yeah, you always have to be very careful. So whenever you share data, be thoughtful of who's included. And I think that could be another question, like that could be a conversation for another time. But I do want to acknowledge that. Then the other thing is, I don't take lightly that behind every data point, there's a story, and that we're talking about human beings and people behind all of our numbers when we talk about nonprofit leadership. So I did want to say that because, sort of, I always feel working on an organization that it's data driven. It's very head space, but I think it's always important to connect with the heart, and I do feel that I do want to bring that before I start saying the numbers, because I don't take those numbers lightly. So to answer your question of what do I see in representation, I think we do have our research team. Again, shout out to all of our research team. They do great work, very thoughtful work. We have the data. We have the report, and I would recommend anybody that wants to dig deeper, go and check the report. It's called a Candid State of Diversity in the U.S. Nonprofit sector. And we did find that 47% of all nonprofit staff identify as white, 70% of CEOs and 66% of board members identify as white. There is a significant leadership gap compared with a broader work. So I think that that's first, and we're talking just about race and ethnicity, and I do want to acknowledge that intersectionality is important. And when I say intersectionality, it's different identities like gender, sexual orientation, disability status. I think we have the data to show that there is not representation. So I would say that that's the first thing that the data shows. So we have the numbers to back up this statement. In addition, Latinx leaders, as many leaders of color, presented at the CEO and board level compared to their presence and staff. And then this gap is even wider to Latina women. I'll show some of that, I'll share some of those numbers later. And then when we look at executive leadership roles, we see that only 50% of CEOs identify as Black and 6% identify as Hispanic Latino, despite much higher representation of these groups among staff overall, and not to mention if we look at the population of the U.S. As a percentage of that population. Think here, and then again, going back to resources, I think I'm going to cover many things if you want to dig deeper. To funding network, did data woven, and I'll explain a little bit more about data woven, but this is a visibility, power, and perception portal grounded in our data, our demographic data. And when I say our, thanks to all of the nonprofits that have shared, but Candid, the data that has collected, it's designed to build by community to reveal the disparities too often masked by aggregated data. When we look at the data that this research shows, we see that just 3.6% of CEOs in the nonprofit sector are identify as Latina, or Latina women. I think it's an issue of unequal access to opportunity, capital, and decision-making networks. Should I say that again?
It's up to you. That was pretty good. If you want to, you can.
I'll say it again because I do want to stress that this is not a pipeline or talent issue. It is about unequal access to opportunity, capital, and decision-making networks.
And I love that you said that, if you want to keep going, that's so true. That's what I was saying. That was my experience as a young and, Latina. Even the whole point that there's still foundations that you can only apply to if you know someone on the board. Like, how do I get into those rooms? I always ask I feel like it's the same even as staff. Like, how do you get into, we have to study harder. We have to do things so differently, but we have the talent, and it's just about giving us the opportunity to move up. So thanks so much for sharing. Can you tell me a little bit about the progress you've made? Is there anything that you feel ever since you started in the social sector?
Well, I think the fact that we have the data is important, and then that we've continued it because it does provide some baselines. And I hope there comes a time when we look back and then we could say there is more representation. So I think that that's progress. The fact that even Candid has done such a powerful and that we've been encouraging nonprofits to share. I know that there is nuance as to when and how to share identity information, particularly in this political climate. For those that see the benefit and want to use it, there is this option. And then I also think within that option, it should be voluntarily provided. There are also very valid reasons why you wouldn't want to share the data, but I think that's progress already, that we are collecting the data and then we have it to back up the story. I think if we want to talk about justice, it's always a personal journey, and you have to put the work. I still have a lot of blind spots. I still need to continue working on it. And it's like the gym. You have to go every day. It's a muscle. You have to practice. And I do feel, and shout out to all of everybody that has helped me in this journey, which is too long of a list to mention. But I would say creating spaces where we can talk openly and support each other, particularly whether that's Latino leaders or BIPOC leaders, because we need to stick together, and also allies and white people, and then having those spaces. So I think one of the things I did at Candid is we created the employee resource. We provided spaces for different identities to come together and have conversations within the organization. So keep learning organizational, how can I create spaces? And at a more sector-wide level, I've also been part in many groups that capacity builders that think, okay, how can we make this more accessible? To your point, resources that we shared or having access to training for everyone, we should be leveling the playing field. So also having those spaces.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned, I'd like to talk in our podcast from our experiences, have taken us to where we are. They help shape the decisions we make. Que yo también viví eso, even with fighting for or negotiating. There's literally data that men negotiate more than women. And so we talk about the gender gap, but it's like, how do we also how do I make sure that I'm not a part of that statistic and that I negotiate in whatever job or role that I can do to also help be a part of that, salary transparency. The way that Candid, uses data through the 990s and through building, I think it's really important that organizations use it as a tool, because a lot of orgs have been using it as a tool for many years, whether it's in prospecting or again using those kinds of seals of transparency, which I know you'll talk about. But when I talk about I want to close the gender pay gap, okay, I have to make sure I'm standing up for myself. I know the tools for I can negotiate and things like that. It's yeah, and there's so many more small things that you can do for yourself that overall helps, these kind of gaps that we see. I really appreciate you bringing it up because it's a big gap in the nonprofit sector, you know? So, all right. So we're gonna move on to the next question, and I love this question because I love talking about collaboration, right? And so, what has been your experience with collaboration in the social sector? If you apply for a grant together with an organization who does similar work, it's not really competition. It's building that collaboration and a higher chance to obtain the funds and execute the work that you're promising to do. That's one of the ways that I view collaboration, but can you tell me a little bit more about?
Sure. So I think for me, and you'll see me talk a lot about personal organizational system because I think it is important to understand, and I think there is differences. I think for me, a ground collaboration throughout my career, I've worked on working partnerships or doing different multi-stakeholder initiatives. And I do feel something that we can all relate. And I feel that the things I felt more the proudest, either personally or work wise, I couldn't have done it alone. And I say that because I think it's important for me. That's where I come from, where I say in collaboration, we're going to do it better together. And the outputs are going to be better because we don't have all of, as I said, I have blind spots, or I don't have all of the context, or I don't have all of the talent. So that's why we need to bring people. And there are things that I can contribute, but then there's so many other things that people can provide. I think like when we're talking about collaboration, we need to be rooted in clarity and humility, which is also that piece of knowing that I cannot do it myself. And I think sometimes in leadership or in decision making, sometimes that's not the situation, but then always understanding how we can be better together. I think strong leaders know the organizational strength and limits of the organization and are willing to align with partners to make a bigger goal than what we would be doing alone. It should be proactive and reactive. It takes a lot of time to build trust and not that much to break it. So you always have to be very intentional. And I think the other piece, and I think to paint some picture because it's still very abstract, I think I did want to talk. I did mention Data Woven and Women's Funding Network. I think that that's such a good example of how organizations can come together. Candid had the demographic. Their research team was doing the analysis. They saw the gap of doing intersectional analysis. Members wanted to have that information. They wanted to make a public tool, and it's available to anyone that wants to use it. We came together, we founded resources to make it happen, and 10 organizations, the course of 9 months, led by WFN, Women's Funding Network, brought together this tool. And I think, yes, the tool is very important, it's very powerful, but then all of the conversation, all of the nuance behind it, the hard conversations of what the data can and cannot show were had. And I think the result is something that we couldn't have done by ourselves. And I think it is a very powerful tool, particularly in this time where talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion seems like a risk. I think it's very important that tools like these ones are out there that have the data and then that allow for starting conversations or understanding a space that, again, it also serves as memory.
Yeah, thanks for mentioning too that, I there is a moment where I still believe that diversity should be celebrated, but it is at risk. I think that we are nonprofit leaders all across the country are living um, a very hard time right now. And how does Candid help that? How do we get nonprofits? How could nonprofits use some of the tools there to be more intentional right now?
So before we jumped into that, I would say again, I think this is a pick and choose as we speak. Would want to highlight before going back to the Women's Funding Network. I think there is an article called "Building a Tool for the Sector Together: Co-creating as Shift Sharing," and I think I would recommend if people want to dive deeper on what that experience looked like and the lessons learned. What is Candid doing to help and sort of allow access? I would say thank you for the shout out. For those people that don't know, Candid profiles are a free tool that every nonprofit can access, and then they can claim it. And basically, We use data, public available data from the 990s of the organizations. And then as nonprofit, you can go and choose what additional information you want to contribute. When we talk about seals of transparency, you share basic information of your organization, you earn seals of transparency. So I think that that's the context of what's Candid profile, what are seals of transparency. As I mentioned, this is a free tool, and then nonprofits that claim their profiles do get visibility. Accessibility in the terms of being able to access our data is important, so that's why we have free tools and resources. You mentioned our trainings, Candid Learning. You can check Candid Learning. Free. All of our trainings are free. And they're very high quality. So I think allowing for people to understand how to fundraise, and the trainings are mainly around fundraising. And we do have some relevant special guests where we invite other people that are experts. Speaking of collaboration, to share their expertise, have those sort of resources. And then also, we are a nonprofit, so we also have to pay our bills, charge for our membership and to access the tools. But then we have other ways. I don't know if people are aware, but 75% of the nonprofit are smaller than 1 million. And then if your organization is smaller than 1 million in revenues or expenses, you could access Candid products if you earn the gold seal. And then also, shout out to all of the libraries and all of our community partners. We have over thousands of libraries across the US where people can go there within their public library and access our services. So we also want to make sure that we are in the communities and people can go to their local library and access the resources, and that it's not a barrier. So go for the gold. You could have it at your own space, but then you could also go to a library. And again, shout out to all of the librarians and all of the resources you shared with the community. I think with some of the information that we provide at Candid, we have the U.S. social sector dashboard, and we have dashboards on how many nonprofits there are at the congressional district level. Organizations can help educate the general public and our elected officials as to the important work that we do as nonprofits and the amount of benefit we bring to each of the communities that we serve at the local, state, federal, international. And again, I think it's very US focused, but I know that there are many organizations that also do international work.
I love it. Yo ni siquiera sabía que getting gold, and maybe I've read it or maybe I knew. I always go directly to pricing, and right now I'm working as a consultant, so for me it's very expensive. But like, just to tell organizations que es gratis. Like, if you reach this, I love that. I had no idea. And instead, I can focus on like how they can use the tool for many things, because that's where a lot of the barriers are. Like, I love it. Thank you so much for sharing all that.
I'll make sure that I also share the link so people know how to do it.
Oh, yeah. This has been great, and I want to be respectful of your time. My last question is, what advice would you give to nonprofit leaders and change makers right now?
So I start with my own advice. Take a deep breath. We are enough. Do one thing at a time. Journey starts with one step. We are in this together. And you are enough. I think that that's one of the bigger things. I think I speak for myself. Sometimes the challenges and or what we're seeing seems too big, but then you just have to figure out, is that something I can contribute? Do I have the energy? And if so, how can I take it in bite sizes? Because that's the only place that's the only way to actually affect change. I also think we always have to be very vigilant, use data. I think data always helps us to predict what might be coming, anticipate risk, and explore options. Like, we have to be ready for change. And I think nonprofit leaders know that. We've been stretched so thin in so many ways. So I think if you can use data to ground your conversations and your decision making, and then also be open to collaboration. I think that takes both knowing what you can give. It's not just taking, but then knowing how can you help others, and do you have the capacity to help organizationally. But then also think, what do I need? And don't be afraid to ask for what you need, because I think many nonprofit we feel that we're the caregivers, we need to be taken care of, but then we also need to make sure, what do we need, and how can I ask for it? who can actually provide that help or that support, be that co-partner that we're going to be building together. And I would lastly to understand power dynamics. I think we're very attuned, but not just understand and acknowledge that power. We all have power. Be honest about where you hold power or privilege and use it to open doors, gift resources, and make space for others. And just lastly, going back to how we met, I think that that's an invitation to everyone. When I learned about Andrea, I saw the amazing work that she was doing, learned about VIA through the National Council of Nonprofits. That shout out to the National Council of Nonprofits. If you don't know about them or if you are not connected to your to your state nonprofit organization, please do so. But then I was very inspired. I was like, how is this other Latina out there doing such amazing job? I called, le mandé un mensaje por LinkedIn. Andrea, ¿qué estás haciendo? Me fascina. And then here we are. You always have to knock doors and go through the uncomfortable. Sometimes it's like sending a bottle to the sea. Sometimes they might not answer, but if they do, then very good things might happen. So take the chance. It might not feel natural. It might feel a little uncomfortable, but that's how great collaboration and relations by saying hello or highlighting, hey, you've inspired me. So muchas gracias, Andrea. Here we are.
Yes, I know. And Catalina, thank you so much for your time today and your honesty. Y súper especial para mí compartir con otra colombiana, our journey into the social sector and where
Mm-hmm.
we've been, and even now being on both sides of, para mí, seeing you over there in Candid in this big organization that represents nonprofits, and me working with the small grassroots really helps with the connection. And I hope that more people will learn about the Candid tool and how I can implement it when I work with some smaller nonprofits. But we'll share the links to all of the Candid tools and how she definitely gave us some insight on how it can be used. And then, I'll make sure that everything is on the description. And hasta la próxima es Dr. Andrea Ortega with Palante Nonprofits. Gracias. And siempre para adelante.
Siempre para adelante, Andrea. Un gusto.
Don't forget to subscribe as well as like this on all of our social media. You can find us on Instagram at Palante Nonprofits and on our website at www.palantenonprofits.com. Gracias.